You need a digital library of your very own that is under your control. And in this video, we're going to describe how you build something like that, how you maintain something like that, and how you secure something like that. You know, it's easy to take for granted the things that have always been with us, or, you've always had access to for as long as you can remember. Like the script for this video, which is inside of the cloud, and I can just kind of read it whenever it's time to record the next T-Rex Labs content module. But remember that information isn't always as accessible as it is at this very moment. You probably remember that a couple of years ago there was a mysterious Christmas bombing in Nashville that knocked out internet services and cell phone for almost an entire state. And then earlier this year there was an even wider cell phone outage for other just random technical reasons that covered a huge amount of the country. A friend of mine was traveling and his entire team found themselves unable to check whether their flights were on time, or get a hold of Uber so that they could get to the airport, or call anyone to let them know that they were going to maybe make it to the airport or not. This kind of thing happens on a relatively and possibly increasing basis. And it doesn't even have to be some kind of giant world-shaking, world-ending event.
If you look over there behind me, that's a tornado. Yes, a twister in Los Angeles. It's one of many tornadoes that are destroying our city. There's another one.
Sometimes it's just an honest network failure or just a freak mistake. Last week, Google Cloud accidentally deleted all the files of a $135 billion business, a pension fund down in Australia, just completely evaporated off of the servers because of a mistake. So, if your files aren't as secure as those of a $135 Australian pension fund, are you confident that you will always be able to get them? Now, fortunately, that business actually had some off-site backups. Good for them. It sounds like it was almost an accident. We're talking about an Australian pension fund of over $135 billion that was relying almost entirely on the cloud, which is more the way that things are going nowadays. Not only are businesses more reliant upon the internet, more reliant upon cloud services, but just everything in general seems to be going this way. I own several Steam games, except actually I don't. Steam can revoke those titles from me at any time, even though I have purchased them. Ubisoft said recently that consumers should get used to the idea of not owning games. Fortunately, I'm already used to the idea of not owning any Ubisoft games. And even Amazon has removed books from people's Kindles after they have paid for them. And to make it even more disconcerting, it was a copy of 1984 by George Orwell, which means that now we're going to have 1984 clips inside of this video. I can already feel them coming. The point that I'm trying to get across is that information isn't very permanent. Information isn't very resilient. It's actually pretty fragile. And the more we depend on other people's servers and other people's storage mediums and other people's storefronts and other people's clouds, the more fragile our data becomes. It has the ability to just go away, especially in emergencies.
Friedrich Nietzsche. We cannot burn Friedrich Nietzsche. He was the most important thinker of the 19th century.
Oh, please. Nietzsche was a chauvinist pig who was in love with his sister.
He was not a chauvinist pig.
But he was in love with his sister.
Excuse me, you guys? Yeah, there's a whole section on tax law down here that we can burn.
So yeah, I guess there are tons and tons of books worth of data that we could afford to lose. But what about the stuff that we can't? What about information that we really, really want to preserve, either because it's business data for our, not quite $135 billion company, or personal data that belongs to us, or information about history and science that we would like to preserve in the future, no matter what else happens to civilization?
Oh, I'm sorry. The lending library is temporarily out of service.
Are there books that we want to preserve, even, or perhaps especially, in the case of an emergency? Well, the answer is yes. There's tons of books that I would love to build a giant library around and have handy all of the time, but to be perfectly honest, I'm not made of money, certainly not $135 billion worth of Australian pension funds, and I also don't have the room for as big a library as I would like to physically maintain. And so digital libraries come in really, really handy. I want you to go right now and look at a program called Kiwix. I'll have the link in the description down below. Kiwix. Actually, I have no idea how it is supposed to be pronounced, but what it does is allow you to download and store digital libraries. The most important is probably Project Gutenberg. Project Gutenberg has over 60,000 books that have been digitized, and they're all old. They're all in the public domain, which I think is really important, and I'll get to that a little bit later. But being able to store the libraries of previous generations so that we have the information that they had, and we have the kind of information that, you know, often gets forgotten, is incredibly important. To download the whole thing is about 70 gigabytes using the Kiwix program, and you can get it for a whole bunch of different devices. You can run it on a regular Windows or Macintosh computer, but you can also get it for phones, iPhones and Android, and then you can also get distributions for other devices as well. This right here is a little device from a company called Gridbase. It's pretty simple and straightforward. It's a Raspberry Pi Zero with a micro SD card, 516 gigabytes of library data. Different files, different books, different records are stored on here, and the Raspberry Pi computer mounts those and shares them over Wi-Fi. So any device that connects to the Wi-Fi of this little device, once it is powered on and sustained for a few hours by this battery, all those devices have access to all those files, and they can search and find, and I can even download stuff from here onto this device to have it when this little micro pocket server is turned off. And the whole thing works really nicely inside of this completely waterproof little Pelican here. But that may not be something that is incredibly necessary for you. You may just want to be able to store stuff like that on your phone, or perhaps on a tablet like the one that we talked about for our ATAC build. The great thing about a lot of tablets is they're relatively secure without those pesky mobile radios that connect to cell phone networks all of the time. You get much better battery life. Some of them are ruggedized, and they generally have micro SD storage slots still. So you can expand your storage and have room for lots and lots of files, including Wikipedia. I want to talk about Wikipedia for a second because physical encyclopedias are kind of amazing. I grew up reading these World Book encyclopedias, and I have a complete physical set that my kids are allowed to read whenever they want. And this is volume A. So as you can see, they take up a lot of room. Wikipedia is the modern solution, but Wikipedia comes with some downsides. Wikipedia is something that is constantly in flux. Wikipedia becomes much more useful if you realize that it isn't really an encyclopedia of what is true. It is an encyclopedia of what people believe to be true. It's really no different than anything else that is created by human beings. The difference being that it's constantly being recreated and reformed by human beings. But thanks to Kiwix, you can download a copy of Wikipedia that doesn't change. And in fact, I really wish that I had saved earlier copies of Wikipedia that I downloaded back when I had almost no cell phone coverage here in Middle Tennessee. There were older programs than Kiwix that would let me download older versions of Wikipedia. And back then, the top 10% of Wikipedia articles was hundreds and hundreds of megabytes. And I stored it on this phone, which no longer works because even when you do control your own devices, they don't last forever. You actually need even more of a plan for saving your data and taking care of it than just having it in your control. On this hard drive is what I believe to be the last remaining copy of a documentary that I made about the New Zealand film industry. I remember it being a pretty good documentary. It might be worth sending this to a data recovery place so we could see it again, but well, maybe not, because I never could find a buyer for it. Maybe it's better for this hard drive to just stay dead. A reminder for all of us about the impermanence of data. Hard drives don't last very long, so as you store your information, you should have a plan to have multiple backups on multiple types of media in multiple locations. And the cloud can be one of those. You can't treat the cloud as your only backup. You can't trust it very far, not even Google. But you can have that as a single backup as long as you have others. You should probably have 3 different backups. One of them should be remote somehow. And you should also have a really good idea of what the shelf life of your different storage mediums are. And digital just doesn't last nearly as long as you would expect. And it isn't just the data itself is impermanent, it is that information from the past is being ignored, and in some cases even kind of rewritten.
Everything fades into mist. The past is erased. The lie becomes truth, and then becomes a lie again.
It's actually really easy for information from the not too distant past to just vanish into thin air. There's a whole bunch of websites from the early days of the internet that just no longer exist. They were built out before the Wayback Machine started archiving stuff, and there just aren't backups. There just is no way to find that sort of information. There were television shows that were shot years earlier on that celluloid film that we still have records of, and there are shows that were shot more recently on tape that are just gone. So a lot of stuff today is backed up in a bunch of places, and Facebook and Google will store that stuff to the best of their ability or desire, or as long as they don't make too many mistakes. But there's a whole bunch of stuff that will just vanish if it isn't taken care of. There's a famous quote that says, "Anything that is not saved will be lost." One of the most important things that we can do is maintain a continuity of information here in the information age and try to retain some sort of semblance of connection to the past so that we have some idea of where we're going. We need a true north on our compass, and we need some anchors in the path so that we actually know our physical location. And what better way to demonstrate that than with this ATAC tablet right here. I have this loaded with a whole bunch of maps. Maps of the area that I am in so I can find my way around. But I also am using this device to download information from the past that I want to use to verify the information that I am being given today. So Wikipedia is a great example. Wikipedia, as I said before, is a record of what people think is true and also what they think is important. That is why the comic book character Wolverine has far more information about him on Wikipedia than basically any of the founding fathers.
You must be Wolverine.
Tear me up inside!
That remarkable metal doesn't run through your entire body, does it?
We live in a postmodern world where truth is supposedly subjective, and the battleground of ideas is best controlled by, well, controlling the information that shapes the ideas. That's why Project Gutenberg is a great thing to have. This is a historic collection of books, pre-copyright books that haven't been touched or meddled with, and the more of us that download copies of Project Gutenberg, the better. The better we will be able to verify previous copies of Gutenberg books so we can figure out if they've been messed with by AI or other meddling entities of some sort. And there's an assumption that most of us have that Google and Facebook and the NSA will just save all of this stuff for us. But there's actually a ton of stuff that just kind of falls through the cracks and disappears. Books that aren't old enough and important enough to be saved in a lot of places, and they just kind of fall off of the radar.
All those moments will be lost in time, like tears in rain.
I bought this incredibly retro 1976 edition of All About CB Talk Radio from Radio Shack, of course, at a neighbor's estate sale. This is not the world's most valuable information. Western civilization does not hinge on what is inside of this book, and yet this book is a really useful touchstone of knowing exactly what people were capable of and expecting to do with CB radio in 1976. if Wikipedia gets that wrong for whatever reason, I actually have a way to double check that. That's something that Project Gutenberg allows me to do. So it's really nice to be able to have copies of this sort of information. And there's another one that I want you to go and get. I want you to head to archive.org, which is another fascinating source of archival material. The Wayback Machine shows you a ton of websites as they were in the olden days, before the wireless web. And I want you to look for Soldier of Fortune magazine. Soldier of Fortune magazine kind of falls into this category. It's not important enough that a lot of people are going to be storing it, and yet it has very valuable information inside that shouldn't be lost. I had a copy of this issue of Soldier of Fortune magazine. This is March of 1993, when I was 12 or 13 years old, and this particular issue was pretty formative to me. The cover article is about the development of the FNP90, which went on to be the most video game friendly firearm ever developed. But this article was very much based in reality. It was about designing this thing around a set of tight constraints for very specific uses and very specific people, and some of the testing in different environments to ensure that it was in fact, capable of Stargate and various other things that it was going to get used for. As a young boy reading about this, I had a completely different conception of product design and weapons manufacture, and probably shaped me in ways that have affected T-Rex arms to this day. Is Soldier of Fortune magazine a little bit tacky sometimes? Does it have FUD lore in it? Is it as cheesy as the 1976 Radio Shack book that I just showed you? Not really. Sometimes. Usually not. But inside of Soldier of Fortune magazine is some amazing reporting. It isn't going to be preserved by the Pulitzer Society or the New York Times, but it is stuff that I don't think we should lose. Now, my dad actually knew the publisher, Bob Brown, back in the 80s, and they would occasionally meet up at these little restaurants inside of Washington, D.C. They weren't really open to the public, and they were usually run by Nicaraguans, and the people who were inside of these establishments were like intelligence-type spook characters. But these are people who were doing some very interesting reporting, the kind of reporting that we should not lose. I'm currently working on a history of the ATF, and when I get to the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I'm confident that some of the best reporting on what was going on at that time is going to be inside of this magazine. There were some incredible writers like David Hackworth and David Dye who worked on this magazine, and you know David Dye because he is the Hollywood weapons trainer for all of your favorite things.
All of you NCOs have disgraced the 101st Airborne. You can consider yourself lucky that we are on the eve of the largest action in the history of warfare, which leaves me no choice but to spare your lives. Now get out of my office and get out of my sight. Get.
In this same issue of this magazine are articles about Saddam Hussein's firing of the oil fields, some fascinating urban sniper stuff that was happening inside of Serbia and Croatia, and the author was there, not just as an embedded reporter, but as somebody who was teaching guys how to do counter sniper operations. This is fascinating on-the-ground reporting that, does civilization hinge on it? I sure hope not, but it is the sort of stuff that will be very important for future conversations about all kinds of stuff, and as touch points for verifying the veracity of other information that we get and that we save. For example, Wikipedia. I have read Wikipedia articles about the South African Defense Forces that say things that, well, based on pictures that I see on page 49 of this issue, are probably not true. By the way, there are a few issues missing, so if you happen to have those missing issues in your dad's attic or your uncle's basement, you can scan those in and help us complete the collection. In fact, I would say that everything that I've talked about here needs a little bit of work. The Kiwix software is functional, but it's kind of clunky. It's much better on Android than it is on Windows. And a lot of the collections of stuff that you can download just need a little bit of polish and fine-tuning. I would love a tool that allows me to build my own Wikipedia archive so that it has the categories that I think are important and I don't waste space on the ones that I'm less interested in. There are a bunch of things that can be done in this space. And the good news is that even as the trend in the rest of the world is to depend more upon the cloud, depend more on other people's servers and other people's code and other people's hard drives and other people's services, there are a lot of people realizing that that isn't tenable and it isn't trustable for one reason or another. It's time for us to get back to some alternatives. Pieces of hardware that are more durable, pieces of software that are open source, verifiable, and more trustable, and an assumption that we should be able to control our own data because we will just take better care of it than other people.
Rutherford Unperson, substitute Ogilvy, war hero, recently killed Malabar front, today awarded posthumous Order Conspicuous Merit Second Class.
So I want you to join in the effort of preserving this information for yourself, first and foremost, but then for other people if that becomes necessary. So get yourself a copy of KiwiX or Kiwix on whatever device you'd like to use it with and start downloading stuff to store. Figure out what sort of storage mediums you would like to use and start keeping track of how long you've had them on the shelf. Download Soldier of Fortune magazine, download any Wikipedia archives that you think will be interesting and start saving some of that off-the-shelf stuff. Download map data for ATAC and store it on devices that you're going to be using for stuff like that. And also, get yourself a whole bunch of field manuals. Field manuals that are on paper are great, but there are hundreds, thousands of really good field manuals that are all in the public domain and they've been published by the Department of Defense, and the non-classified ones are available. Your tax dollars paid for those, so you should download them, save them, and have them accessible on all kinds of different devices. And maybe get yourself a Faraday bag so that you can store stuff in more secure ways than just, lying out on the table. The good news is that as there is an assumption on the part of a whole bunch of people that the cloud is safe, your data is forever, and nothing will ever break down or be lost, there are a number of people who are a little bit more realistic. As Google continues to make mistakes, as Wikipedia continues to kind of get out of control, constantly expanding its articles about superheroes and diminishing its articles about American history and other really important formative ideas, there are people who want to store data, take good care of it, and disseminate it as widely as possible to the people who will appreciate it. One of the things that we're going to be doing at T-Rex is continuing to open source different parts of our product design and our process design, and we'll be putting those things on GitHub. And the information that we're putting up here on YouTube, I expect that it will be here forever, but we're also going to work on backing it up in other places. So the T-Rex podcast, for example, is going to be available as a BitTorrent download. Peer-to-peer file sharing that decentralizes the information across a whole bunch of places is one of the safest ways to ensure that information is both backed up and available. So we'll figure that out. I don't think that YouTube wants me to link directly to BitTorrent seed files right here. But if you go to the T-Rex Arms website and you click on the podcast page, you should be able to figure out what it is that we are doing. So hopefully that is something that is helpful for you. It will get you information that is interesting for you to read now, especially some of those really fascinating articles in Soldier of Fortune magazine from the 90s that talk about stuff that is becoming more and more relevant today, but also field manuals and books from the ancient past, which in the future people may not want you to have. The cloud is just other people's computers that you don't control. AT&T is other people's internet that you don't control. And what happens as you become more and more dependent on other people, you realize that a lot of people are not dependable. You need to do the opposite. You need to become more dependable so other people can depend on you. So it's not actually enough just to have really cool devices that store data. You also have to know some of it up here. Otherwise, it's hard to tell that history is being monkeyed with. For example, there's a movie clip here or there in this video that could be wrong or possibly mislabeled. Even if you had the entire Wikipedia on here, you'd only suspect that if you thought about it. And how much more important is it to think about the really important vital information and, actual factual history?